Good afternoon. I'm Paul Fletcher. I'm the Executive Director of the Virginia Bar Association. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our VBA Practice Management Advisor webinar for the month of June. Shortly, we'll be hearing from our friend Jeff Schoenberger at Affinity Consulting, but we welcome you to this program. This is a free offering that we make available to all members of the Virginia State Bar as part of our program. We also have a monthly newsletter that you can sign up for. And we have a number of our programs, some of our material that's available in front of our member wall at vba.org/PMA. Look for that information there. Please join us. Thank you for putting up the screen. This is the PMA page. Join us for a live chat. The next one is on July 15th. And our next webinar is going to be July the 25th. But let's get down to business. Jeff is going to tell us how to use portable devices for mobile lawyering. You can leave your laptop behind, use your cell phone or your iPad. Please take it away, Jeff.
Thank you, Paul. I did want to mention also that we do have the VBA consults. Those are for members, but you get 30 minutes with some of our experts. If you have any tech questions, could be as broad as I've been practicing for several years and I want to go to the cloud with some stuff before I try and modernize my practice, or it could be as simple as I don't know what iPad to buy after your seminar today, and I need a little bit of guidance on what I should pick up. So anything in that range, it's covered by the VBA, and happy to talk with you about those. So visit the page, take a look at the resources, and of course, if you like, schedule consultations. As Paul mentioned, we're talking about traveling light, and I want to just stay up front a little bit here. When I go on vacation, I don't take any work stuff. This isn't about I'm on vacation so I can also work. I don't work on vacation. I never want to work on vacation. I don't encourage anyone to ever do that. What this is about and what we're going to talk about today is instead, it's a beautiful day here. I'm in Ohio. It's like 70. If I had, some stuff to do, like just writing that I could, do on a single screen or a little bit of light work, maybe I want to go out to like an outdoor coffee shop, or I want to go to the park and sit and write. And, anymore, of course, information follows us wherever we are. So it's not about like I can work everywhere. It's about I don't have to be in one place if I want to be somewhere else, and I can do the same thing. I can be in a better environment. I can be in a little bit nicer, a little bit more comfortable, a little more relaxed, better overhead lighting instead of fluorescence, depending on what your office situation is. So that's what we're talking about today. We've got 5 parts we're going to talk about. I might not get to the sample workflows, but when you get the materials, there are 4 or 5 sample workflows that you can try, moving data between a mobile device and your primary computer, working on one, seeing the changes on the other, that sort of thing. So if we don't get to those, they're at the end of the materials, and feel free to experiment with them and try them out. So we'll talk about the hardware that makes this possible. We'll talk about, obviously, to make most of this work, you're going to have at least the stuff that you want to work on in the moment in a cloud-based device or cloud-based storage. We're going to talk about some of the apps that will make working mobily easier for you. And then, of course, anytime we're running around town with client data, we want to talk a little bit about security and what we want to keep in mind in those situations. So 4 topics we're going to cover, and then a little bit of homework if the topic interests you enough to do some experimentation. Let's start off with the hardware. So anytime that you look at the statistics for attorneys, legal professionals, and what mobile computing devices they use in terms of tablets and smartphones, it's overwhelmingly Apple. It's iPhones and iPads. For tablets, it's like in the 90s as far as the people using iOS tablets basically iPads as opposed to an Android tablet. For phones, it varies somewhere in the 75 to 80-ish% of people being on iPhones as opposed to some Android phones. So much of what we talk about, all of what we talk about in the hardware situation, and then most of what we talk about in the apps will be tilted toward iOS, just to keep that in mind. So there are a couple of different ways that you can approach the iPad purchasing. So this is sort of the starter that lets you go out and be able to work on a reasonably sized screen out and about somewhere, client shop, client location at, if you do estate planning, someone's home, nursing home, or like I said, if you have some writing to do and you just want to go out in the park and do it. From the iPad perspective, there are two different ways that you can go these days. There are the iPad Air models, which if you're going to equip it the way I sort of would run you about $750. And then there are the iPad Pro models. The big difference at this point between an iPad Air and an iPad Pro is that you can get the Pro models in 12-inch screens. So the smaller Pro and the Air are going to come in at around 11 inches, and the Pro comes in at, well, almost 13. It's 12.9 inches. So you get basically 2 extra inches of screen real estate. And that's the big gain if you go with the Pro at this point. Second thing you're going to want to consider, depending on, again, on how you anticipate using this device, is an Apple Pencil. And with either the new iPad Airs or the Pros, you're going to look at the Apple Pencil 2. There are two versions of the pencil out there. There's a $99 version, and then there's the new version, which is $130. Definite advantages to the new version, one of which being that it charges right on the device. It's magnetic attachment, so you don't lose it. You don't have to store it somewhere else, which was a big problem with the original Pencil setup. Third thing to consider would be a keyboard, and Apple offers a couple of different keyboards that you can go with either the Air or the Pro. There is what they call a Folio keyboard, the Smart Keyboard Folio. It's about $180, and it folds down pretty flat. There's then the Magic Keyboard, which I think is actually definitely a better typing experience, and it magnetically attaches to the iPad as opposed to one of the more traditional case type designs. And that's $300 or $330 if you get it for the 12-inch. So you're looking, stab in the dark, somewhere around $1,000, a little more, to get the hardware to make this sort of work. I do want to mention, even though I did talk about the Magic keyboards, the keyboard that I actually prefer is the one we see here on the screen, which is the Logitech Combo, and it's only $150. It uses the same connection, so it has the same speed and the same quality of performance as the Apple ones, but instead of being $180 or $300, you're coming in at $150, and I like it pretty well. And you can actually get this for older models. So the one you see there, if you're an iPad, let's say iPad archaeologist, maybe, you notice that has a home button. So it's obviously one of the older models. So they make this particular keyboard, Logitech does, for different models. So if you've got an iPad sitting around, you can even start out with this, just grab the keyboard. If you're trying to come in with something brand new and you want to spend as little as possible, because this is going to be an experiment the first time out, you can get into an older iPad, a keyboard, and a pencil for around $580, $590. So if this is your first time out trying this, maybe instead of spending $1,100, you want to spend half that and give it a go. And then if it performs as well as you hope or better than you hope, then there are definitely secondary markets to trade in the smaller screen iPad or the older one, and then move to one that's might be more fitting for what you're going to use to long term. In addition to the iPad and the keyboard and the pencil, if there's the possibility that you have to listen to something, maybe you want to review a deposition, and you're going to do that, you have a little screen on the iPad, you're going to watch the video in a little picture-in-picture, and you're going to have Word open or some other program open to take notes about the deposition. You're going to need something to listen to. I generally would go, if you're in the Apple ecosystem, the AirPods rather, do the best job of just like super easy to integrate into the setup. You just put them in, you activate them, it finds it right away. If you want to go with something a little bit less expensive and something that is, particularly if you're an Android smartphone user, maybe you want something that like the Anchor pods there on the, I assume they're not called pods, but the Anchor headphones there on the left-hand side. We have on the site a recommendation list for different headphones in different situations. So if you go to the site, you can read those recommendations, and they were updated, I think, just a month ago. So you do want something to listen to. I don't mind the in-ear ones. There are people who don't. So the recommendations also have some over-the-ear models if you're somebody who doesn't like having the little earwig thing shoved in there. So that's the hardware. Let's talk a little bit about where the data has to be to make this really work well. And that's, of course, in the cloud. There are options, and they're fading away though, but there are options where you can directly connect an iPad to a computer and transfer documents through what used to be iTunes, but now if you're on Windows, it still is. You would still use iTunes for that. If you're on a Mac laptop, the iPad generally shows up in the Finder now, just like a USB drive or a external hard drive would show up. So there are ways to transfer the data if you really, really, really don't want to use the cloud. But generally speaking, I think in most instances, certainly the cloud is easier. And in, like I said, I'm pretty comfortable putting stuff out there. There might be some things depending on the case or the matter, or I wouldn't, but generally speaking, I would. And of course, if this is a one-time outing and you wanted to copy some stuff down from your, normal storage, put it on iCloud for a while, work on it, then, impose upon yourself that extra step of when you get back to the office, you make sure that you move the files over so that the new stuff that you worked on is where it needs to be. There's always that option too. Of course, if you're, depending on what you're working on, you can take papers with you. I'm generally not a fan of that because, it's like napkins at a picnic. If it's too windy, you're going to spend the afternoon in the park chasing your papers around rather than actually writing. So if you're not in the paperless sphere right now, a couple of different ways you can go about getting there. One is to buy a desktop scanner. If you don't have one of those contraptions from Xerox or Canon or Konica Minolta, if you've got one of those large ones, they probably have some scanning functionality already. And I would start with that. Again, trying to minimize, if you're first out of the gate, kind of minimize the investment to see if this is something that you're going to do long term, if it plays to your advantages, plays to what you hope to do when you're out and about. So I would start with that because you already own it. If you don't have that set up now, or you have a printer that doesn't do scanning, I would look at the ScanSnap IX1600. Super easy to set up. ScanSnaps have been around. Well, when I started practicing law in 2008, I got a ScanSnap, and the fundamental appearance of the device has changed very little. It's basically the same size. They've made it faster, higher quality. They added a touch screen. They've done some other things, but it's still phenomenal. It processes 50 physical pages. So if you're doing two-sided, you can scan 100 pages of information, 50 physical sheets very quickly. It's wireless, so if you don't have space right next to wherever your computer is, it works over your Wi-Fi network. If you happen to be a Clio user, you can actually scan things directly into Clio. And as it says there, the MSRP is $500, but generally speaking, you're going to find it like on Amazon for somewhere around 400 to 420, depending on day of the week or whatever's going on with inventory, that sort of thing. Very good, very high quality. If you want something that's super mobile and takes advantage of something that you already have, of course, we all carry these phenomenal cameras in our pocket, and they don't just have to take pictures of our food. They can take pictures of documents. Some products, some apps already have this built in. So if you happen to be a Dropbox user, there is a scanning functionality in Dropbox. And the difference between using a scanning functionality in an app and just taking a picture is that if you just take a picture, the picture's not going to, it's going to be whatever you put in the frame, right? Whereas the scanning app, whether it's built into Dropbox or it's a standalone app, is going to look for the four corners of that document. So you're going to look for the edges of the white piece of paper on the wooden desk or whatever you've got it sitting on. It's going to find those. It's going to only take a picture of that, and then it's smart enough to realize that documents can be, 5 pages, 10 pages, multiple pages, however many. And so it gives you the option of keep adding pages. Whereas if you're just using a camera, so you can take a picture of whatever you have in the frame, which is almost certainly going to be more than the document, unless you're Ansel Adams. And then you're going to take photo after photo after photo, and then on your own have to stitch them together. Whereas the scanning function's built into Dropbox, it's built into Apple Notes. So if you've got an iPhone and you've got it on a modern version of iOS, probably, certainly at least 14 and 15 being the current one, it might have even been in 13. So at least the last 2 years of iPhone operating system updates. You've got that built into Apple Notes, so you can use it there. And then there are apps that would specifically be scanner apps. This is SwiftScan. It's, as you see there, it's a little pricey relative to what we're accustomed to for some apps. It's going to run you $35 a year. It's a subscription. It will run on both iOS and Android. So if you happen to be in the Android camp for your smartphone, but you've got the iPad because you've listened to this seminar. Then you've got an app that'll run on both, and you're paying $35 a year. Advantages of it over, say, the Apple's built-in scanning on its Notes app is that this program will do optical character recognition. If you're not familiar with optical character recognition, it's essentially that the computer reads the document, quote unquote, and translates what would normally just be a picture of the document into the picture of the document plus a layer of searchable text behind that. So the computer goes through and it looks at blobs of black ink on white paper, and it says, well, that blob kind of looks like a T, and the blob next to it looks like an H, and the blob to the right of that looks like an E. So there's the word "the," and it stores that behind the picture of the document. So advantage of that is that when you go to do a search on your computer for a document, it's not just searching the file names, it's searching the text of the document. And if you've OCR'd your PDF, it can search the text of that PDF. So SwiftScan would do that. And then it offers the ability to upload to a bundle of different cloud services, just about all the main ones you can think of. If you are in a practice that still relies on faxing, this program will actually fax out to it. It won't receive faxes, but it will fax out. So if you're in, I don't know, medical litigation or something to do with government benefits or some other area of the law where faxing is still something that happens with some regularity, that might be an advantage for you. The app that I like for iOS is from a company called Readdle. It's called Scanner Pro. It's much less expensive than SwiftScan, but it is, again, only iOS. One of the newest features that they came out with in the last, I don't know, year or so is that if you've never done it before, or if you start doing it on the basis of our time together, you'll notice that when you take a picture of the document, there's usually a shadow because you're holding the phone over the document to take the picture. So the folks at Readdle have done some excellent math and so forth to figure out how they can remove that shadow. So that's a nice benefit, that when you're out there doing the scanning, that they've added that functionality. They also have the optical character recognition. They have the storage or backup to the cloud services. They don't have the faxing. So if the faxing is a big thing, that's, I think, unique to SwiftScan. So a good option here. Also less expensive. I want to say it's, don't quote me on it, but I'm going to say it's like $8 maybe. So definitely cheaper. And then if you are someone who uses a document management system, in this case, specifically NetDocuments, Adobe Scan, which is free, will scan directly into NetDocuments. So if you're in a firm that has NetDocuments as their document management system, this might be the way to go if you want to get something from when you're out and about directly into the system that everyone uses. As you can see there, it's free, but there are, of course, paid tiers, and it will do optical character recognition as well. So we've talked about the hardware. We've talked about how you're going to get whatever paper you have either at the office and you're going out, or you're going out to meet the client and you're going to scan their stuff as opposed to making a copy, bringing it back to the office and then scanning it. We've got some options there for you to consider. On the scanning side, if you need the hardware, you're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of $400, usually on Amazon. On the app side, you're looking at somewhere between $8 and $35, give or take. So we've got our mobile documents now. We've taken our paper, we've turned it into electronic ones and zeros. Where are we going to store it so that we can access it? Talked on the last slide about using NetDocuments, and if that's your way to go, we've got a few examples here later on. If you're a firm that doesn't have a document management system, so maybe you're a true solo or you're a small firm, and you want to think about how you want to be able to share those documents and have them available without going to the cost and overhead of a document management system, let's talk about the first option here, which would be syncing. So if you're, generally speaking, most people who are using Microsoft Office these days are probably paying for it through a Microsoft 365 account, meaning they pay Microsoft X dollars a month or X dollars a year, and they get all the updates and that sort of thing. If you're paying for that, you have access to 1 terabyte per person. So if there are 5 people in your firm, each one has a full terabyte of OneDrive space. That's just included with your cost. If you're not a Microsoft shop, but you're a Google Workspace shop, so you use Google Calendar and Gmail and that sort of thing, Google Drive is the exact same way. If you're paying for Google Workspace, you're getting gigabytes, terabytes for each user that you're paying for, included with the cost. So if you want to, again, if you want to experiment with this, if you haven't done a lot, then I would start with using whichever one you're paying for already. And they both have apps for iPhone and iPad. So you can open OneDrive on the iPad, find the document you want to work on when you're in the park, open it up in Word on the iPad, start typing away, go to town. Same thing you could do with Google Drive. You could open it on, if it's a Google document doc, then you could just open it and edit it right there. If it's a Word document that you're storing on Google Drive, basically the same process as we just talked about with OneDrive. The 900-pound gorilla in cloud storage used to be, and it's still very good. I really, really like how it handles particularly versions, is Dropbox. And I think we've hopefully all heard of this to some extent. It's not included with anything. You would just go to Dropbox and pay for their storage. And it's I want to say for the pro level, for like an individual, it's something around $15 per user per month. And then they have versions for, professionals like small office, and they have an enterprise version, things like that. The nice thing about Dropbox is that outside of Microsoft and Google apps, if an application supports any third-party storage solution other than iCloud on the iPad, it is most likely to support Dropbox. So you decide you like some random program that you want to write in. Okay, if it supports something besides iCloud storage, it is most likely to support Dropbox. So that's one advantage on the iPad that Dropbox has. It was kind of first to market with cloud storage, very well accessible, very easy for developers to write to. So most apps that use something other than iCloud on the iPad are most likely to support at least Dropbox. The other ones on this list are a little bit less convenient in some ways on the iPad. Box.com, which is the one to the right of Dropbox, works pretty much like OneDrive or Google Drive, so not as deeply integrated with a lot of apps as Dropbox is, but still very good. ShareFile, which is our bottom left, is a program I would use not so much for cloud syncing, but more for storage or more for sharing. So if you wanted to share files with other people, either outside the firm or clients, things like that, ShareFile is a great way to go with that. The icon directly below Google Drive is the icon for files, which is iCloud storage. So if you've got an Apple device and you've never paid Apple any money for storage, you have 5 gigabytes, which is pretty low on the ends of storage, but it's free. And then for 99 cents a month, so $12 a year, they'll give you 50 gigabytes. And again, if you're just kind of experimenting with this or just using it for Word documents, probably pretty good. And then you can spend more if you need more space. The one directly below Dropbox is a company called Tresort. Big distinction for them is that they make you define your own password. So they never know your password. They can't access your data. If you forget your password, that data is secure forever because not even you can get to it. So it's very nice in the sense that they've built in the security that I would want for my most sensitive files, but it makes it a little more inconvenient or challenging to work with on the iPad, because the iPad works so much by essentially sharing information across applications, as opposed to having, like on Windows or the Mac, you've got sort of like a baseline desktop that handles all the file operations. And then the one at the bottom right is NetDocuments, and I've got a demo of that here in just a minute. We'll show you how that works pretty well on an iPad situation. So those are the sync services that we have available out there. I think at this point, we're all pretty comfortable with what a sync service makes available, accessing the files from anywhere, being able to send documents to clients, being able to give the client a link to upload documents if they want, sharing files via links, and of course, you have the option of making files available offline. So I'm not sure if you're depending on where you're going to go when you want to work outside, if you're going to go to somewhere, say in Moab, Utah, and sit out in the close to the desert, and there's no cell phone and there's no Wi-Fi, then the offline stuff matters. If you're just in a park near your office building, probably perfectly good cell coverage there. If you're a no-go on cloud storage, like you just won't do it, you have two options, one of which I mentioned early on, which is you plug the device into the computer and you manually transfer them over. A second option is with most of the newer iPads, they use either USB-C connections or Thunderbolt connections. So you could plug in a USB-C based flash drive and you get your files over that way. Or a third option, which is what's on the screen now, is the ability to go through and actually set up essentially an internet connected hard drive that lives in your office or in your home, wherever you want it to. And so the data isn't stored on Dropbox's cloud or Microsoft's cloud or Google's cloud. It's stored in a box that you own and control and have in a premises or a leased space that you are in charge of. Biggest advantage in that case is that you're not reliant on cloud terms of service for what do they do if they're served with a subpoena or a warrant. In this case, if they're served with a subpoena or warrant, it's going to be a subpoena or a warrant to a premises, and Fourth Amendment law is, I think, obviously much more litigated, and the scope of that is known much better than, say, what terms of service say for an attorney's work product or information when it's stored on a cloud service. Definitely adds complexity, especially if you're not very comfortable with setting up hardware or connecting things to the internet. So it's a bit of a challenge. If you want to talk about that at one of the offline, grab some time on one of the consults from the website. Happy to walk you through it. I personally use one of these, but mostly for just things that I'm experimenting with or things that I'm running internally, not so much stuff that is facing the internet. If you're thinking document management or you've already got a document management system in place, I do want to say that you've got a great advantage here in that, particularly with NetDocuments, you've got the ability to use these apps on your mobile devices. WorldDocs, Epona, and iManage also have applications that you can access on a mobile device. As you see there, NetDocuments is the only one out there with an Android version. So if you're an iOS user, you've got 4 choices for DMS. If you're an Android user, I would probably stick with NetDocuments. Thing that you get to avoid with a document management system, particularly, is that you don't have to carry all this stuff around. You can instead, carry not a banker's box or anything. You can carry your iPad around, and it makes it super convenient. So I've got a couple slides here that demonstrate how NetDocuments works, but the other ones on iOS are pretty much the same. So you're going to open up the iPad. We've got, in this case, our NetDocuments right there in the taskbar or the dock for the iPad. Fire it up. And so I've got my favorite cases or favorite matters here. If I go ahead and want to open up, say, the Lebowski matter, I click on that or touch on that, and then I can pick a document within the matter. So let's say we've got this will open up here. And what do I want to do with it? Well, maybe I need to make some changes or I need to review it. And, nice day, I grab my iPad, I grab my Apple Pencil, I'm out and about. And so go ahead and open that up. When I click on that, I've got then the option to edit here on my toolbar up at the top right. And then when I click on the toolbar button, I can either edit it directly in Microsoft Word on the iPad, or I can edit it creating a new version of the document. So you see there that on the top there, on the top left, Lebowski, it's version 4. That's what V4 means in that list of files. If I go ahead and I pick one of these, it will open up my will, and you'll see a couple of different kinds of edits that I've made here. The first looks like scribbles, because that's what my scribbles look like. And that was done like with an Apple Pencil. So I'm scratching things out, circling, all that sort of stuff. Then you also see on here that we've got the traditional track changes type of red line edits. So I make whatever edits I want, and you'll see in this case we've got them noted on the side there as well. And then when I'm finished, I hit the button at the top left, which is effectively the save button if you're in Word on the iPad. Word on the iPad doesn't have like a Control S kind of thing. It's going to save automatically as it goes along. So effectively what you're doing here is you're saving and closing. And then back in here, you'll see that we now have Lebowski version 5. So I had clicked on the button to edit as a new version. And then when I clicked save and close, it sent me back to NetDocuments, and I've got a new version of the will. Nice thing about this is it's in whatever system everyone else in the firm is looking for. So if someone were to then, 5 minutes after I finished making edits, go into the Lebowski estate planning matter and look at the will, they would see what I had just done. They wouldn't see version 4 because we're all looking at one single thing. Same thing would happen if you were using a more consumer-oriented cloud sync service like Dropbox or OneDrive or whatever. The difference here is that with those, you're either overwriting the original version or version 4 in our case with version 5. Here, version 5 is effectively a new document, and if I wanted to, I could go back in time and see version 4. Let's talk about some other things that you might want to have out with you or have available when you're on the go. You, of course, want to be able to, have your calendar, fairly standard stuff these days, not that exciting. Contacts, same sort of thing. And then case information and case research. Let's focus on those two for a bit. And let's talk about a couple of different apps that are out there that would help with some of this. If you're not using a practice management program, so no ActionStep, no Centerbase, no Clio, no Cosmolex, whatever it is, then if you want to have information available, you're probably saving it in some sort of word processing document, or OneNote is out there, and that is a free application, even if you don't have a Microsoft subscription. You need to have a Microsoft account, but the accounts are free. It's just a username and password. We all have thousands of those at this point. So you do have to create one of those, but otherwise it's just free, and it's got a setup that are fairly similar to, let's say, multi-section notebooks that you would have used maybe in high school. A couple pros and cons here to the use of OneNote. It's included with MS 365 and Office, but it is also free. So if you're not a subscriber, you can still get to it. Super easy to share, both because it's fairly straightforward in how to, send a link and share a notebook with somebody, but also, again, because it's free. So even if you have a 365 account and they don't, they can still see it and edit it. Pretty good search for the software, of course. So if you put a bunch of stuff in the notebook, you want to make it as easy to find as possible. This includes the ability to effectively, it scans, let's say, photographs. So if you take a picture of a sign, for example, it will be able to pick out the words in that sign. So it's pretty handy too. So that gets to the automatic optical character recognition. It goes through, it does that for documents. It also does it for pictures. There are browser extensions both for the iPad as well as your traditional computers, so that if you want to save links to cases or to search of the recorder's office or whatever it is, there are browser extensions so you could save that information or that web page into a particular notebook that you chose. And some downsides, of course, OCR is not perfect. You'll see that no matter where you're doing your optical character recognition. And it doesn't have like a broad number of integrations. So one of the keys when you're trying to assemble a good technology stack, whether it's mobile or a traditional computer, is that the more things that you can have talk to each other and share with each other, the less you're doing duplicative work of data entry, essentially. So in this case, OneNote does not have a huge swath of integrations. And as I mentioned, it's set up basically like a multi-section notebook you might have used in high school or college, where you create a notebook and then you can break it up into different sections. So you could do something like a notebook per client, or you could do a notebook for a matter and then break the matter down into ways that, 10, 15 years ago, you would have organized a Redweld. You could have a section about pleadings. You could have a section about depositions. You could have a section about document production, so forth. However you wanted to organize it, but its notebook is the sort of the file, and then within the file you have sections, and then you have pages. Another place that you could store information if you are using case management software is that this case management software both lets you generally create fields. So if there's not a specific field for what you want to store, you can probably customize it and create a field. Two is that most of them have some version of a client portal. What I'm showing here is what used to be Clio's client portal. It is now Clio's portal for CoCounsel, and they've done a whole new app for clients. But in the case of this old portal, or what is now the CoCounsel portal, you can pick what you can share. And then, of course, since it's just a web page, there's obviously web viewing mechanism in Safari on the iPad, so you can do that. And a lot of these web-based practice management programs also offer apps. So Clio has an app both for you as the legal professional, as the firm user, they have an app. And then, as I mentioned, for clients, there is, or was released in October, I believe, an app called Clio for Clients. And the Clio for Clients app does two things. It lets the client essentially text message or instant message with their firm. And when the client texts or messages with the firm, that appears on the firm side in a communication tab within the matter. And the second thing the app on the client side will let them do is scan documents in the same way I talked about how Dropbox and Apple Notes have scanners built in. The client could scan a document and then upload it, and that would go into the system. So client portals broadly, and then even more generally, the practice management software is a great place that you, especially if it's web-based, that you can store information and then be able to access that wherever you are. Another thing to speed things up if you are writing on the iPad is a program called Text Expander. And we've got an example up there on the right from Brett Burney, who is does the Apps in Law website, and he's actually got a whole course on Text Expander for lawyers. So he set it up so if he types BC in the @ symbol, he gets his whole email address. And there are writing apps on the iPad, not Word, unfortunately, but other writing apps that will read into this database. So you could create a whole number of shortcuts to do entire paragraphs if you wanted, or if you get a lot of the same emails frequently, there are ways that you can set it up so that you could easily do a reply with some quick keyboard shortcuts and generate, say, 3 paragraphs or a reply. Very handy. It is a subscription service. For an individual, it's about $3 or $4 a month. And then they also have what they call teams or business. So if you've got many people in the firm who want to use it, and you also want to, if you have many people in the firm who want to use it, I would go with the teams anyway, because I think it's cheaper, at a bulk rate. But the second thing that you get with the teams option is that you can share snippets. So the firm could say, we're going to create a firm-wide snippet that's TFTC for telephone call to clients. So if you sit down and you type TFTC, it automatically expands a telephone call for client or to client. So saves you some time. On the iPad and the iPhone, I believe, they have a keyboard, which is not a physical keyboard, it's a software keyboard. So that if you've not done that and you want to learn how to do that, again, schedule time, it takes like 5 minutes, happy to show you. But you pull up, instead of the normal iPad software keyboard, you pull up this Text Expander keyboard. And so you could just type literally with all snippets. It would be like typing in, say, shorthand if you were comfortable with shorthand back in the day. So good example there of a way to save time. There are also, if you're an all Apple sort of life cycle. So if you have a Mac and an iPhone and an iPad, in this case, under the keyboard preferences in iOS and on the Mac, you can set your own snippets. They can't be as fancy as some of the stuff you can do with Text Expander, but of course it's free and it syncs also across all of your Apple devices. A writing app that I like on the iPad is called Scrivener, and it runs on iOS, it runs on Mac, and it runs on Windows. The iOS version's $20, and the Windows or Mac version, either one, are $50 each. The reason I like this, particularly on the iPad, is that you'll see down there in their screenshot that they've got a draft folder, and that's where you're going to keep your writing. And then they have a research folder, and that research folder can store things like not just other text, but it can store pictures, it can store web links, it can store PDFs, it can store just about anything that you can think about. And when you're working on the iPad particularly, this is handy. So I've got a screenshot up here where I've got an article, I'm working on some case or some examples for a technology show that we're working on. And if I want to go into the research tab here, if I hit the research tab, it's then going to take me over to my list of items within the research folder, one of which is a case study for a bar association. So I can click on that, I can open it up and look at it, see what I want to get to. And then by just hitting back, I can get back to what I was writing in the first place. So very handy, I think. And then if you're on Windows or Mac, this shows it on the Mac, but it works on Windows as well. You can see both things side by side. So if you took a full laptop with you, you could see the draft on the left side and the research material on the right-hand side, and you're still within the same application. So I think that's pretty handy. We're all pretty comfortable, I think, at this point with using Amazon's Kindle to read books. If you haven't been using it for notes and for highlighting, I suggest you try that out. It works pretty well. If you've ever wondered where you retrieve all of your highlights or all of your notes, you're going to go to read.amazon.com/notebook, and that will give you access to them. In a lot of cases, you might run up against a publisher set limit about how much you can highlight, essentially. So I think I ran into it in one book by Daniel Pink. I think it was like 10%. So if you highlight more than 10% of the book, which might honestly have been excessive on my part anyway, it cuts off the what you can export from this website. But if you keep it under that, generally speaking, I think you're probably good for an export. And certainly you can always pull out the notes that you wrote in the Kindle app. If you're looking for great note-taking apps on the iPad, particularly to take advantage of the Apple Pencil, the two best ones out there are Notability and GoodNotes. They're both, again, iPad, iOS only apps. They're both around $8 or $9, so not overly expensive at all. They will also, and they do a very good job of this, surprisingly good job in my opinion, they will optically character recognize your handwriting, and they do a decent job of it. So you could write with the Apple Pencil, you could write, court, and you could search like a normal text search for court, and it would find your cursive handwriting. So pretty impressive there. You can, of course, back up these notes to any number of the cloud services out there, iCloud, Dropbox, OneDrive, etc. It's got, depending on how you write, I'm left-handed, so I, tend to slant the paper, and I've got my hand over a bunch of the screen when I'm writing, depending on where I am on the, note page. So it's got detection for that to avoid, causing errors with that. You can, since it's an Apple Pencil as opposed to a traditional pencil, it not only does the writing, it'll do the highlighting, you can change colors, all that sort of stuff. You can import PDFs and write on them there as well. So a nice advantage to that. The one downside is that it doesn't really integrate with any of the document management systems. So you couldn't save your Notability or your GoodNotes notebook back to, say, NetDocuments, for example. You could export your Notability or GoodNote notebook as a PDF and then save that into your document management system. But of course, whenever you did that with the PDF, that would be a snapshot in time. And then as you continued to make notes in the notebook, you would then need to export a later PDF to get the new stuff. Both of them at this point can do audio recording, and this is really handy if you have that turned on during a meeting. You could, as you're taking notes, and then when you go back later, you could tap on that area of the note page, and it'll play the audio that was associated with the time that you took that note. So very nice. Think about, if you're using one of these apps, how you want to organize your notes. You can do individual notes into folders or notebooks. You could have a subject notebook. So in the same way that in high school you would have had US history and you would have English and whatever notebooks you might have had, you could do that. The other way you could do it is to have, say, one notebook for the week or for the month, and then at the top of each page or whenever you change subjects or cases or whatever, you just make a note of what case you're writing on and then rely on the text search for that. If you want to share notes, you can share them within the app, so the other people have to have, if you want someone else to be able to edit the note with you, they would also have to have the iPad and the application. You can also, as we talked about with the document management system, you could export it to a PDF and then share it that way as well. Of course, they will do the automatic backups, which I think is great, especially if you happen to lose or otherwise damage the iPad. You don't want to have that be the only source or only location for this information. Depending on how you want to share it out. Again, with a net document, you would need that to be with a PDF saved. And of course, you could email your notes as well. Very easy to do that. Here's an example of a note page on the left-hand side, and in this case, a book on the right-hand side. So I'm left-handed, that's why the note page is on the left-hand side, but you'll see it's got my handwriting, and that looks pretty darn close to what my handwriting actually looks like, and it's certainly, I think, readable anyway. You probably, or you may disagree, but I think it's readable. So that gives you an example of how you can, have material that you're reviewing on one side of the screen in a split screen and have a completely separate app open on the other side to take notes in. And since I mentioned Kindle, and of course, Kindle books generally, unless they're free of copyright, cost you money, or you can get them from the library. An additional way of getting books from the library is through Libby. So they're an app similar to Kindle, but run by a large number of libraries. And so I would encourage you to check your local library to see if they offer Libby, in which case, if it works as it does for my local library, you go through and you use their system to essentially check out the book, and then you get an option of downloading it as a Kindle file or a more standard open EPUB file. Whichever one you choose, then of course you're just going to go ahead and you can click, it'll show up, you can click to open it and you can start reading. So I was reading that book, I click, it opens, looks like a normal book, and just to prove that the exact same thing can happen with a Libby book as with a Kindle book, you can have it split screen. So notes on one side that you're writing, text or whatever you're reviewing on the other side of the screen. And while you can add text in a typewriter sense on GoodNotes on the iPhone screen being on the right-hand side, of course, there's no Apple Pencil support as yet on any iPhone. So if you want to make edits, you could either use a traditional stylus, which I've always hated, or you could type it out with the iPhone keyboard. And of course, you can view it on the iPhone either way. And then just to show you, we've got an image in here that you can put next to your notes. The last couple I showed you were GoodNotes. This screenshot is from Notability. So it looks a little bit different, same basic functional principles. But in this case, this is something that might have been handy or near in relation to the case. So instead of trying to copy it down, took a picture of it, pasted it straight into the notes around where he would be looking for it. So notes just don't have to just be your handwriting. They can be images. There are drawing tools in there as well. So you could paste, different pictures and arrows and stuff like that. You can change the type and the text and color in addition to doing all the same thing with your own handwriting. And then an example here of searching. So in this image, we searched for the word or the number 200, and it found it in several places in the actual typewritten text, but then it did find it in the handwriting as well. Another app to look at, which is a little more expensive than either GoodNotes or Notability, is called Liquid Text. And what you do here is you import a PDF, and then it makes it very easy to do different edits and extractions. And essentially you have like a cork board or a whiteboard down below or to the left of or the right of the actual text. And so you can assemble your own ideas and you can extract bits of the text and set them off to the side. And then it's essentially a simple way of explaining it might be like a PDF reader and a mind mapping kind of application in one. So you could rearrange these bits of text. You can draw different lines between them to connect ideas, things like that. I found it pretty useful. And then here's another example zoomed in where we have a connection drawn between the green highlighted paragraph and the red underlined paragraph. And of course, just to prove that it also supports the left-right split screen, the left side, we have a book. The right side, we have the PDF document of something else and the highlights or the extractions there. A little bit of a quick run through on some other apps to finish us out for the last 10 minutes. If you want a little bit nicer calendar program for your iOS devices, I would take a look at Fantastical. Fantastical is a subscription. It's going to run you $40 a year. You get that and the app I'll talk about here in just a minute. Nice thing about Fantastical is I think it's much more, it makes a much better use of color. So it makes it very easy to see what appointments you have upcoming. And as long as you're using different colors to identify them, makes it super simple to see whether it's a client meeting or an internal firm meeting and so forth. Secondly, you'll notice down at the 12 to 12:30 meeting, there's a little video camera. That's an indication that it is a web meeting. And if I click on that, it will take me directly to the appropriate app, whether it's Zoom or Teams or WebEx or whatever, and it will throw me right into the meeting. So very handy. The other app that you would get from FlexBits for that $40 a year is a contact app called CardHop. I think it is, again, prettier and easier to use than the native Apple Contacts app. So I like it. I use it a lot. If you're interested in a review that Brett Burney did on this, go ahead and take a look at the website Apps in Law, and it will give you a little bit of detail on that. This app I have sort of a love-hate relationship with. So it's Synchronicity Pro for Exchange, and then what this it does one thing and it does it well. It's a little slow, but it does it well. Is that it lets you view other people's Exchange calendars without having to connect them to your own calendar application. So I have this set up so that I can view certain people's calendars and see what they're doing, and it doesn't show up on the same application, or I don't have to add them specifically to my own calendar sync utility or my own calendar app. It's $5. Like I said, it works. It does what it does well, and it is single purpose, and I do like it for that too. If you are someone who reviews a lot of e-transcripts, there's a free e-transcript viewer for Westlaw. So if you're looking for a way to do that, maybe it's something that you could do out and about again. LitSuite has some great apps for the iPad. They're probably the priciest apps I've ever seen for the iPad. You subscribe to them now. But if you're in a situation where you do a lot of trial presentation work, this replaces programs that would have cost a fortune, and you might have even had to hire someone to run it for you. They have one to do trial presentation. I even know professors in law school who use this as their medium as opposed to PowerPoint and such. So it works very well for all kinds of presentation work. Transcript Pad, it's a little more it's definitely more expensive than the free one from Westlaw, but it's much nicer in its features. And then the same thing for document review. They have an application for document review as well. All in, they're going to run you, like I said, very expensive, $400 a year. But if it's what you do all the time, I think it's definitely worth considering. And if you want to get an idea of how their apps work and whether you like sort of the structure and the setup, they do have a free app out there called Exhibit Pad, and that will let you, set up exhibit viewing and stuff like that. But mostly it gives you a sense also of how they program, how they set up the app to see if it's something that works well for you. If you've taken a look recently, particularly on the iPhone, I don't know if this happens so much on the iPad, there are kind of two versions of the MS Office apps out there. There's one that is the all the apps, well, not Outlook, it's Excel, PowerPoint, and Word in one app, and it's called Microsoft Office. And then there's another one out there that would be the individual app. So you would download Word, and you would download PowerPoint, and you would download Excel. Big difference from what we've talked about together today is that the individual apps will support the split view. So when I went back and I showed you, Notepad on the left and Document on the right, in order to do that split view, you would have to have the individual apps of Microsoft Word, or as necessary, Excel or PowerPoint. The advantages of the one on the right are that you only have one app to download, although app sizes versus storage capacities on iPad being what they are, I'm not sure that's a huge savings one way or the other. And you get a few additional actions that you can do in Microsoft products with the Office bundle app that you don't get with the individual apps. Personally, I prefer the individual apps because I'm a big fan of using the split screen. Office Lens is a great program that can help you, particularly if you're some firm that uses whiteboards and that sort of thing, or those giant Post-it wall pieces every so often. Rather than having to copy them down by hand, it will take a photo of them, and it has different, essentially it's like a camera designed for this purpose. So it knows how to handle white balance for whiteboards, and it knows how to handle other display media where you would want to take a photo of it. So free, very easy to use. Kind of nice. We talked a little bit earlier about mind mapping. If you were using the Liquid Text program, another method of doing mind mapping would be a full actual mind mapping program. And the one I like best out there for the iPad is called MindNode, and it will let you, add images. It lets you do all the sort of mind mapping tools that you would think of that you've traditionally been able to do on the desktop. And of course, it's, Apple Pencil aware, so you can draw the lines that way. Very handy. Great way to sort of think out, or strategize on how you might want to approach something. It's much more tactile than if you're trying to do mind mapping on a traditional laptop or desktop, and so I really like it for that. And then there are programs you can export this to, so you could set it up such that the export is essentially like, say, a checklist or another, a multi-tiered outline, and you could export that to, say, Word, and then use it in there and type different notes or key points under it once you've got the structure laid out the way that you would like it. With our last 5 minutes together, let's talk, or 4 minutes, let's talk a little bit about security. So certainly with all of the Apple products, they have this Find My functionality. So you should definitely be turning that on. Generally speaking, unless you've made an effort through the setup process to turn it off, it should be on. So that's very handy in case, and let's just be kind. Let's say you forget your iPad somewhere, and Good Samaritan found it, and you want to be able to get it back. It's easiest to use that Find My to find out where you happen to leave it. The Android products have this as well. So if you've got an Android smartphone, they've got something similar under the Google umbrella. To my knowledge, and if you know differently, please let me know in the chat. There isn't a built-in option for this sort of thing in Windows yet. So there are third-party programs definitely that will do this, but I don't think there's a built-in version that comes straight from Microsoft in a Windows out-of-the-box laptop. Same thing with drive encryption. On the Apple side and the Android side, unless you made an effort when you set up your device to turn it off, it's almost certainly on. So if your iPad has a passcode or Touch ID or Face ID, that is a 99% assurance that drive encryption is enabled, meaning that they need your passcode or your fingerprint, or you need to be standing in front of it in order for it to unlock and make the data readable. So if someone steals it and you've got one of those functions engaged, then the likelihood they can actually retrieve the data is pretty close to zero. On a Mac laptop, you're going to want to make sure that File Vault is engaged. And that's under System Preferences and Security. System Preferences, and then it's either Privacy or Security, something like that. Just search for File Vault in the top right of System Preferences. And that will encrypt the drive. Same difference if they don't have your password, or they don't have your, in the case of a Mac, you'd need a fingerprint. So if they don't have your Touch ID or your password, they're not going to get to the actual data. You might have lost the laptop, but the laptop is the actual physical hardware is the least valuable part of when you're running around with client data. On the Windows side, you want to make sure you have Windows Pro, whether it's 10 or 11, you want the Pro version. That gives you access to the BitLocker drive encryption, and it works the exact same way as File Vault. Got to have the username and the password, or the biometric fingerprint thing to make it unlock. And if they don't have that, yes, they walk away with your laptop, but they don't have access to your client data and information. So whatever it has, whatever your device has, iPad, iPhone, Android, whatever laptop, turn on the Touch ID, the Face ID, or that one on the far right is Windows Hello, which is the Microsoft version of Face ID. Last thing I want to mention is that you should have a password manager. If you don't have a password manager, there are a couple of great ones out there. I personally like 1Password or LastPass. In both cases, they're a step up from whatever's built into your browser. So a browser will store a username and password. These can store usernames and passwords, as well as a bunch of other data. So information about your passport, information about your kids or your parents' medical history, whatever you would like to have secured on any device, and they are cross-platform as well. So Windows, Mac, iOS, Android. Second thing to do would be to enable two-factor authentication on any products or services that you're using that support it. If you're not sure what those services are, go to 2fa.directory, and you could search, for example, for Clio, and it would say, yes, Clio supports these versions of two-factor authentication. Here's where you go to turn them on. And promise this is the last one. I've used this app for my home and my office inventory, And it's a great way to make sure, particularly for an office for hardware, that you keep track of model numbers, serial numbers, makes. And so if, let's say there's a flood or a fire, you've got one resource that you can go to and say, hey, here's all the stuff that was damaged, cut me the check for insurance. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to Paul. If you have any questions for me, feel free to send them in the email, or always schedule a consult. We're happy to talk.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. This is some great information that you have here. For those of you who were on the program, we are going to be posting Jeff's slides. He provided them to us. And if you go to the PMA page, you can see that we have previous webinars as well as previous slide sets available for your viewing there. Thanks once again. We will see you next month on July the 25th. We're going to have a program about your inbox is not a task list. And that's real world task management for busy lawyers, brought to us again from our friends at Affinity Consulting. Jeff, thank you. Please take a look at the PMA page. Take a look at the newsletter. We'll be publishing the July edition next week, and put the July 15th PMA live chat on your calendar. We look forward to seeing you then, and we thank you for watching today. Have a good one.